gotta be a way of killing it. How? How do we do it?
You can't. It's bullshit. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism.
What's happening?
Something in the water.
What do you mean there's something in the
No,
water?
there's just something in the fucking water.
Pharaoh, do you copy?
Standing by.
Prep for dust off. We're gonna need immediate evac.
Roger. On our way.
Say we take off, nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Get away from her, you bitch!
I ain't much for begging. Nobody ever gave me nothing. So I say, fuck that thing. Let's fight it.
Welcome to Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast. I am your host, Jamie Prater, and I'm joined by my co-hosts,
Patrick Green,
Harry Chicos,
and we have a couple of returning guests today who we're very excited to speak with. And before we do, we're not going to read any more patrons because we just did that in our last episode, but we are going to read a 5-star review. If you want to hear your review on this podcast, go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a review, and we will read it on the show. So this one comes from Hetcom, or Hectcom. The crew of, tell me how to pronounce that, please, Hetcom. The crew of Perfect Organism discuss all details of the Alien franchise, big and small, from movies to video games, and everything in between. Their joy is palpable when discussing things they love, and their criticisms are always delivered with maturity and intelligence, an absolute must-listen for any Alien fan. Thank you. As a mature, intelligent person myself, it really means a lot to hear that, Headcon. Thank you very much. And without further ado, we're welcoming back Adam Zeller and Alex White. Welcome back to Perfect Organism, both of you.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming on.
It's nice to have the preeminent Predator voice up in here.
You mean
that's you, Adam?
AVP Galaxy? I'm the only Predator fan in here? Come on, guys.
I wouldn't say
I'm a Predator fan.
Everybody who loves Predator. That's not what I said.
You got to see my NECA collection, Adam.
But today we are here to really focus on Alex today and Alex's contribution to Alien Romulus. We've been talking a lot about this film. We will continue to talk about it. We have a lot of people lined up in terms of design, creature design, sound design, so much in store. But we really thought it was a great opportunity to speak with Alex and their contribution to Romulus.
Well, if I can start with the most asked question that I always get is, did anybody tell you ahead of time? And the answer is no.
No.
I found out in the theater. Well, actually, I found out because a French fan was like, "Are you excited?" And I was like, "About what?" And they were like, "Because something of yours made it in." And I was like, "Stop talking. I haven't seen the movie." I got in there and it was like having a hallucination. I was, I saw it in a fairly basic theater because it was the middle of the day and it was the ticket I could get, and I was sitting there and there it was. It was like, the whole time I was like, wow, this movie is really striking a lot of chords with me that I'm familiar with and really appreciate, like, for instance, the relationship between Andy and Rain, to me, very much reminded me of the relationship between Marcus and Shai into Charybdis. And not in a bad way. I wasn't like, oh, they ripped me off. I was like, oh, wow, that makes me feel so good. I wonder if they're familiar with my work. And then just to have, basically Ian Holm confirm it for me was the weirdest. I was like going wild in the middle of the theater. I was like, how good is this edible right now? And it was me and my spouse and like 3 other people in the theater. So like they had no idea why we were freaking out.
That must have been cool just hearing that name drop for Plagiarus Praepotens.
I know, and it was nice. I was like, wow, and it sounds so classy. I've been saying Plagiarus Praepotens for so long, and they really Praepotens. Very cool. And apparently one of the screens right before it says Monomola Nux Hydria. I was like, wow, both of them made it in. Very good. Spent a lot of time researching those with a biologist, so it was nice to see. What, 6-8 years later? It was wild. So 6 years later.
So for context, for those who haven't read the book, I think we should just set this up a little bit. Of course, there's a scene in Romulus. Obviously, this is a very spoilery episode. There's a scene in Romulus where Rain and company meet a droid named Rook who looks essentially just like Ash. He's the same model. And Ash starts exposition dumping. And in that exposition, some really interesting things come up. And one of those terms is a term from a book that Alex wrote. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the process of that and where that term originates?
Sure. Okay. So where the term originates is it came from I was watching Covenant and I had just gotten sort of my initial contact on the Cold Forge. And so things were going well and it looked like the book was going to go through, but they had said that Prometheus was a different license. It was not Alien from the publisher's perspective. And I was like, the cat's out of the bag. What the hell are you talking about? But okay, fine. And I don't know how, I'm sure you all remember as part of the lead up to Prometheus, Scott was like, oh no, that's not Alien. It's not Alien at all. It's its own thing. It's totally new. It has all the same beats as Alien, but it's all new. So I was like, I think that black goo is going to be where the alien comes from. I think that's what they're saying. Covenant came out and proved it. Covenant came out over the course of writing the Cold Forge, if I recall correctly. And one of the things I remember in the theater in Covenant was a sense of palpable relief. Because I was like, there it is, the black goo inside of Alien. Ha ha ha. You can't stop me. And so I embraced this idea of sort of alternation of generations, dual animal theory. So it's the idea that both the construction materials for the face hugger as well as the construction materials for, the xenomorph exist inside of, this creature's DNA, and it moves in alternating generations like a jellyfish or a hydra. So jellyfish, they start out as jellyfish and then they spawn, and then the spawn take root in the ocean floor and become hydra. And when they spawn, those spawn become jellyfish. So, this system of like egg spider creature, spider creature, spider creature, that's actually pretty normal in nature. And the idea that there could be a secondary sort of parasite riding within the goo is not impossible to believe. In fact, perhaps that's the reason why that particular creature actually takes the form that it does, as opposed to like a neomorph. Maybe we're getting a little bit from the face hugger, whatever that source animal was. But I believe it's a source animal that the engineers combined, or David combined. Could be a source animal from Covenant that he found in the woods, and decided that would be the ideal delivery mechanism. So all those assumptions kind of went into the Cold Forge. But of course, the movies were both being panned for the way that they were handling sort of the canon. They were taking these big, bold steps with it. And I was like, I don't think it's the big, bold steps that are the problem. I think it's the extremely unlikable, forgettable characters. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to hurt my chances here, but I'm gonna say that people didn't like Holloway, and I know that I particularly didn't like Holloway. I found him to be an extreme foil, and I like Numi's character, Shaw. I like Shaw quite a bit, and I still remember these characters' names 10 years later. So it can't be that bad. I looked at that and I thought, this is two animals. This is two animals that have been put together, and that if you look at it, the facehugger is not implanting a larva. The facehugger is not the larval stage of the xenomorph. If you go back and you look at the original Alien footage, you see no larva. When Kane is being x-rayed, you see particulates, right? And I was like, Scott is referencing himself. He didn't put a larva in. He wants you to know that he didn't put a larva in. That's, that's his thing. And all these people, one of the reasons why the Alien, I feel, goes wrong in so many media is because people are like, let's make it like bugs. Let's make it exactly like a bug that we know how it works on the world and can predict. And that's exactly what's wrong with the approach. It's not that you shouldn't have biological consistency. I think it's great to have, there's nothing the alien does that's unique, by the way. Every single thing that it does, another animal already does in nature. Now, another animal doesn't have hydrofluoric acid in its blood, but the vinegaroon whip scorpion, which looks exactly like a face hugger, does have acid for blood, right? And it can spit acid at you. So these are all sort of, it's very natural. And as I spoke to biologists, they were like, it's very natural. Everything that the alien does is very natural. The only thing the alien does, and we can get into this later, that's completely unnatural is the rate at which it gains biomass, which is never more loud than in Romulus, and we can talk about that. But yeah, so I worked really hard with a couple of biologists to talk about how Linnaean taxonomy occurs, and I finally settled on Plagiarus Praepotens. The idea that there's a whole family of Plagiari, right? This idea that so that means that compound, what was it? Compound 1, compound Z, can't remember. That could just be another Plagiarus something, right? And then because the original Linnaean taxonomy was something like Invictus something, and it didn't speak to what other members of that family would do, and it was too focused, and that was one of the reasons why there were all these takedowns in the early 2000s of the Linnaean taxonomy of the alien is wrong. So it was that quest to create a secondary binomial nomenclature. And so Monomala Noxidria means, like evil hand jar of night. And so there are probably other types of monomali present inside of the Covenant world. This is the one that's been adapted to carry Plagiarus Praepotens, the strong copycat. That's
and again, just for clarification on the Plagiarus Praepotens thing. So that refers not to the black goo, to chemical whatever, right? It does not refer to the alien as we know it. It refers to what would be in place sort of an embryo when it's implanted into a host, right? It's the thing, the facehugger. It's like a concentrated version of the goo that is implanted into a host. Is that correct?
I mean, that is the goo. I mean, the goo and the adult are Plagiarus Praepotens in my mind, because, that's sort of like saying what is the human DNA part of a fertilized zygote, right? Well, it's all human, right? Just because it's one cell doesn't make it not, Homo sapiens. And so Plagiarus Praepotens is the alien, whether it is the goo or the alien. In my reckoning, which is up for debate, by the way. But yeah, that's how I see it. And I made a point of, when the novel came out and people would ask me about it, being pretty clear that if we're talking about one cell or a billion cells, it's the same species, And so that's sort of the idea. So when at the end of Into Charybdis, somebody gets pretty doused in that kind of stuff, that's how that works. Now, I will say that the goo is not always Praepotens, right? It's always Plagiarus. It's not always Praepotens, right? And I think there was a second goo name that I came up with for Into Charybdis, which represented what Blue Marsalis was looking for, which is the original, the sort of engineer strain that you see inside of Romulus. Which was, again, I was like, well, that's probably what they were always going towards. I can't give myself credit for that, but it was so vindicating. I was like, I was right. Here's the proof. I do think that where the goo is deployed, it can change species. I think that it mutates very fast because of its ability to gain biomass and its ability to rewrite DNA. I mean, if this thing really existed, this is the thing that I loved about writing the Cold Forge. Because everybody throughout my entire life is like, why would you ever research the xenomorph? That's the stupidest thing. I don't know why people keep doing it, all this other stuff. But when I really thought about it, especially after seeing Prometheus, so as much as I just complained about the characterization, a story where we go find God and God doesn't really like us is kind of cool. And I really appreciated that. And a lot of sort of the more high-minded things that Ridley Scott was going for, I was actually behind. I felt like the goo was a key moving forward inside of the universe, because if it can gain biomass that fast, if it can rewrite DNA that fast, if it can incorporate things from your own body that fast, that is the most useful substance ever produced. And we could cure everything. We could fix everything. We could change ourselves for the future. What Rook is talking about in Romulus is the promise of the Cold Forge. I mean, like I wanted to come up with a reason why you would really actually want to do this, and there would be real actual benefits. I think the difference is that, you know, in Romulus, the system, Weyland-Yutani, embraces the idea for profit, of course. And in the Cold Forge, the system rejects the idea because human healthcare isn't. So it's a little different, but I still like it. I think weirdly enough that I think it's still more cynical to believe that you have to embezzle it from a weapons program to make it go.
Somebody sent me a screen cap of one of the terminals in the science lab where the rat has been experimented on. And on the screen, it has the chemical name spelled out that was used in some of the Prometheus and Covenant viral marketing, I think. The chemical A03959X9115 or whatever. And right above that, it says sample type xenomorph, and it says source LV426. So I'm like, okay, the company knew where the xenomorph was from.
Does that rat have a designation?
I'm not sure.
I'm dying to know, just because, again, there's a rat that sort of undergoes the same process in Charybdis.
That would be interesting, yeah.
But it's sort of like Rook, right? Like I didn't invent Rook because there were like 6 Rooks in the universe.
Yeah, they had a few before, but it's something. I mean, you guys know how I feel about the prequels, and the Black Goo has been a source of frustration. But it's something I really appreciated with your work, Alex, was just you giving a bit more logic to that. And I always did like the idea that it wasn't just some crazy, chaotic viral thing. I mean, it was, but it could be programmed and harnessed into something much more focused. And that's kind of what the xenomorphs have done, either naturally or someone's done that to them. But in your second book, Into Charybdis, someone actually does take that power and finds a way to harness it where they maintain their cognition and who they are, even though they undergo dramatic changes. So I always thought that was really interesting.
Thank
It has
you.
a lot of story potential.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I was really worried when that's the biggest sort of step outside the canon into Charybdis, because that was the most fabricated thing, right? Because the idea that could actually happen, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, there have been a lot of alien human hybrids. I wasn't even close to the first on that one. I was like, I'm going to write this really serious book that has Ninja Turtles ooze rules in it, but it flies. And I think I've never heard somebody say like, oh, that's stupid, which is surprising and pleasantly so to me. But yeah, making that make sense was a big goal of mine, and being able, because I looked at those ingredients and the fandom was like, oh, that movie's stupid because of the canon. And I was like, I don't actually think that that's what's wrong with it. I don't think that's what your problem is. I think that the problem is, and I can't tell other people what their problem is, but you know what I mean. I think that the problem is that the characters don't resonate. The additions to the canon aren't any weirder than any other addition to the canon. We just found out, by the way, that xenomorphs are tardigrades. I had no idea that they could do the sugar capsule trick, but there it was at the very beginning of Romulus. What we all suspected all along, which is that first sample was easily picked up. And this is something else that's really funny about Cold Forge is people are always like, where did the samples come from? Where did the samples come from? I'm like, it's 2179. The company has been around for a long enough period of time that they put a colony on that planet. People have already been causing problems on that planet. Some people know what's up. Some people want to get involved in what's up. I think that Burke, for example, knew something was up and just wanted to be involved. I don't think he was actually briefed. I think he heard a rumor from executives and was like, I want a piece of that.
Yeah, he was suffering from FOMO, I think is what was going on.
I think that's exact, because he's not a smart character. He's by far the stupidest character in that movie, which is interesting because Paul Reiser, the reason you love Burke is because of Paul Reiser. Paul Reiser just really brings it home. But his plan is bad. His plan of like impregnating Ripley and Newt is a huge mistake. There's no chance that he was ever going to get away with it. How was he supposed to explain that the samples went from one room to a different room and then got out of locked jars that they couldn't get out of? I noticed that in Aliens, at least, the colonists figured out to put them in round glass surfaces instead of easily punctured plastic ones. That was something else I really enjoyed about Romulus, is the idea that they didn't design it like a nuclear plant because it didn't fail to safety. So like a fail to safety would be like, oh no, the cryofuel's gone. It automatically ejects all face huggers into the star. Like the cryofuel's gone. That's why they all got incinerated by accident. That's fail to safety. And nothing on Romulus fails to safety. Not the guardrail-less areas, not. So, and that's some good Weyland-Yutani design right there. That feels like Weyland-Yutani to me, not OSHA compliant.
I want to go back to something you were talking about, Alex, because we haven't really addressed this too much on the other shows we've done on Romulus so far, which is that Romulus introduces new life cycle elements. And you were mentioning the tardigrade, and for people who don't know, tardigrades are called like water bearers sometimes, right? And they are able to secrete like a sugar enzyme or a sugar that can protect themselves from adverse environments, right? And so in the beginning of Romulus, what was that?
Forever,
right? So that's kind of what's happening in Romulus too, right? So there's precedent for nature in that. So we see this sort of this pupa transformation cocoon when it's accruing mass really quickly. What do you think of some of the new, xenobiological elements that Romulus introduces? Do they work, or what do you think?
I have no problem with the mid-course element. Like there are so many sort of bugs that cocoon or do something similar, and so it's really not hard to imagine that there could be sort of a mid-stage. Now, it's interesting because of the human crowning kind of comparisons that it makes. But I don't think that that's that weird. I think that it's actually pretty normal. And furthermore, that could be, what we think of again as the black goo could contain Plagiarus, Praepotens, Manamala, Noxhydria, and several other animals still. Right. There's no reason to believe that wasn't some other member of the life cycle that was involved, or it could be its own creation. The question that I have is that dead mass? Like once it leaves, is it like leaving skin, or is that an animal that died? Is there a circulatory system? Is there anything like that? The way that I solved for the rapid accrual of biomass was to assert that Praepotens itself might be an extremophile and capable of using its acidic capabilities to dissolve metal and eat it. And so, like if you see into Charybdis, like Alpha the rat, like etches the glass, and that kind of stuff. And it's not hard to imagine, since they can clearly just acid things up when they need to. That maybe they can go around eating pieces of the ship, or pieces of rock, or just whatever organic matter they can find. Organic matter is high energetic potential, but these things don't need high energetic potential at the beginning. They need biomass to create infrastructure within themselves. The energetic potential seems to be provided by eating 5 or 6 humans. And so it is interesting to me. I was a little bit sort of put off by the speed of gestation. I thought that was even faster than the neomorphs and the moats, and I was already with the neomorphs like, this is too fast. Is this because of the kids nowadays? Like, what's going on here? Like, is there a studio executive behind the scenes who's like, speed the gestation period? I don't know. I don't like that. I feel like that's more unrealistic, but the problem does often become, well, how do you take characters who are being given a lot of exposition about what's going on and prevent them from taking preventative action, right? Like So can we stop? The characters are going to act as prophylactics here, and that's a problem. You know, but at the same time, I don't know. I don't think that was required. I think we could have stuck in some downtime. And there are a number of cutaways I noticed on second viewing that could indicate that minutes or even hours have passed, but there's not really nobody nails down a timeline.
Well, the problem is a lot of the movie has a real time countdown to when the station is hitting the rings, and I think by the time the chest burster comes out, it goes from like 48 minutes to 40 minutes, and it's a full-grown alien. So, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the times where people were griping about the gestation time in AVP. So, like,
right,
it is. Are we ever going to have a long gestation time again? But if you guys were asking about my opinion on just the idea of alien surviving in space in like this hardened cocoon shell, right? So, I mean, I don't think that's much of a stretch. We know they can survive in vacuum. We saw that in the original film. We see it in Aliens after the Queen gets blown out of the airlock, which is always a little strange because there's definitely moments where you hear the alien breathing, right? Like Alien Isolation has that. With the Queen, you have that. So it's like, it's the same question as, do aliens like eat? It's like, well, do they need to eat or do they just do it sometimes? Maybe they can survive without it. So I think the idea, like aliens, the drones and warriors create the hive. So they're secreting hive resin, and it goes to figure like they could, if they needed to, they could create a little mini cocoon around themselves if they sense they're going to be in deep space for an extended period of time. My girlfriend was actually telling me about lungfish that'll sometimes do like a hardened shell around themselves if a lake bed dries up, and they'll use that to survive until like rains come back or something.
Yeah, and also they use that to prevent themselves from being captured because it's mucosal at the beginning, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
So and that was one of the ones that we ended up talking about a lot because I have another book that features tardigrade science considerably, and yeah, I mean, and it's the hive resin to me has always been really interesting because because nobody's ever talked about like xenomorph defecation. Hi, welcome to the podcast. Where what is it doing to excrete waste? Well, the thing is, if it can melt and eat most things, nothing. It's doing nothing to excrete waste because it doesn't need to. And so the question then becomes, hive resin, when it's dried, is that a gelatinous, steel impregnated spider web that we're looking at here? Because that could be, there's like no way to cut people out of it. You know what I mean? Like it once it dries, that could just be it forever, and that to me is really interesting. And from a construction standpoint, this gets back to, if you could figure out what that was from a construction standpoint, that's as powerful as the medical standpoint. The positive applications of this animal are almost never talked about. It feels like we have a whole bunch of people who are just obsessed with the weaponization.
I mean, think of the free labor. Be amazing.
I mean, it is true. I don't think you could convince them to work for you, but I do think that you could milk them, for example, after cutting off all their arms and legs.
It's funny that we're talking about the hive because this came up actually during our review. I had this little aha moment, which might have come to me later than most people, but there's this continuing debate, in fandom around the nature of the hive resin and how it's secreted, and does it come out of the dorsal tubules? Is it something mucosal that they're getting out? Like, and what I love is that because Romulus gives us two examples of the alien definitely, I would think, secreting something, like almost literally concrete in the first one, but also this intermediate stage, like that seems to have come from the creature itself. As it's metabolizing and growing, it's also secreting something to allow it to grow faster. So they definitely see, I think now, canonically speaking, they do, like they create the hive by secreting things. It's not just sort of like an atmospheric element of them being present in a ship or something. It's something that they're physically creating. And it's interesting because we never see it, but isn't it weird? Like we never see it happening, just like we never see, except for maybe in Alien 3, we never see, aliens eating people. Like we these basic life cycle things seem to always happen in secret. And I kind of like it because it keeps us talking and it keeps us wondering what the hell's going on. But it's interesting, right?
There are a large number of animals that we are familiar with and we've seen on a regular basis and have no idea what certain parts of their life cycle look like. Eel mating all apparently happens in the Sargasso Sea. That's one extremely deep trench area of the world, and it covers all the eels that you get in England and Japan. That's incredible, and it took a very long time in human history to find that out. For a long time, gorillas were legends, and I'm not here to tell you that Bigfoot's real or something like that, but what I am going to say is that that's actually very normal. That it kind of feels like that. I also really like that. I don't like settling that debate. I sort of try to avoid settling debates, but I like to provide cool animal facts. Like that's whenever I'm gonna write a novel, there are a couple of biologists that I give a shout out to, and I say, like, what are some cool animal facts we can talk about here that are gonna really be interesting to people? And I got to tell you, like I said, the resin, the nest resin material to me has always been really fascinating. I think that one of the things, if we take the idea of Plagiarus Praepotens to its sort of natural conclusion, I think the most dangerous part of a nest is the biological exposure to potential like motes and things like that. I think obviously the mote is Plagiarus Praepotens plus a puffball, for example. But I think that anything that's in there already could prove to be extremely dangerous. And I would be worried about bacteriological or viral shedding from adult drones. Okay, so like just because you've killed one of these things does not make it not toxic and dangerous, but also I'm worried that it's still infectious. That's something that the films have not covered and continue to not cover. To me, it seems reasonable that a team of Marines with exposed skin could move from one end of a hive to another end of a hive, kill all the adults, and one of them ends up with a neomorph. That's perfectly reasonable to me.
Well, it's interesting because it goes to some of I think the contradictory nature of the black goo in expanded media, because even in recent media like Aliens Fireteam Elite, you see the xenomorphs become neomorphs, like they get infected with the black goo. So that's pretty wild. But yeah, there's always the question of, like, if you remove a face hugger, will the host just survive? And we've seen contradictory stories on that. The recent Marvel comic has it like, yeah, he survives, but he has like this weird psychological connection to the xenomorphs and he has nightmares and stuff. Some video games like Aliens Colonial Marines have said if you remove the chest burster, it doesn't matter, that it's like a cancer in your body that kills you anyway.
That's my perspective.
I've always personally liked the sliver of hope that somehow if you got to some surgical bay, maybe you could remove it. And I did like, even though I had my issues with the initial run of Marvel Comics, I did like the idea of having that kind of traumatic psychological connection to the xenomorphs if you were somehow able to survive that through surgery or other means.
What does it do for you?
I don't know if it does anything for me. I just find it interesting. Like, it's an interesting concept. Like, it's one of those, part of the reason why I like a long gestation period is like there's this tension in the background, like we have to hunt this thing down before it gets too big. If it just gets big like that, it takes away from some of that tension, I think. And it's the same with the chest burster, because it makes it an interesting choice for Ripley in Alien 3, where it's like she could have a normal life. She's choosing to do this to screw over the company. And so I feel like it's a thing that's like with the chest burster coming out instantly too. Like there's more tension if it's growing slowly, like we see in like Alien Resurrection, right? And this guy maybe feels there's some hope he could get it out of him. So it's just that question and tension, like, oh, is he going to be able to be okay even though he's been implanted or whatever? So I just kind of like again, I feel it opens up more story possibilities with that factor, as opposed to just you're always screwed no matter what, and this thing's going to get huge in like 2 seconds.
Oh, well,
I think there's a balance too. I think that there's a balance. Like, part of what makes this creature interesting, or at least XX121 or whatever it's called in its full form, is that we don't know a lot of it. And I think that's my question. One of my questions for the group is, how much do we need to know about this? for it to remain scary. But at the same time, I think about Romulus, and to everyone's point, it does move the fastest in terms of the gestation. And there were other full-grown aliens on that ship where we could have waited for Navarro, they're not really sure what's happening with her. And then we wait, say, 25 minutes or something, and it would just seem a little bit more natural as opposed to 1, 2, 3, here we are. And then 3 minutes later, it's full grown with this coming out of this vaginal pupa or whatever. That's also huge. But I think that there's a balance here. And I don't know where that line is, how you strike that balance. I want to mention an earlier point that you brought up, Alex, in terms of Prometheus and those very elevated, amazing ideas. I'm with you. There's some amazing things in Prometheus that keep me coming back to that film. What kills that film are the characters. Point of fact, everyone pretty much universally agrees to that. But the engineers, the goo, those are very intriguing things. But at the same time, I think what Romulus does successfully in terms of the black goo is it pushes it into something else. Whereas when the black goo was introduced in Prometheus, it was on the heels of the X-Files using the black goo as essentially a trope to do whatever they wanted. What'd you say?
Same goo, X-Files and Alien, same universe.
Yeah. I mean, and then it grows in them. I mean, in X-Files, it grows inside a host and then bursts out. I mean, it's the same thing. The creature looks different, but it's the same vehicle or whatever you call that. But I loved where Romulus takes this. It's classifying this and identifying it as something very specific. But I also think it still needs mystery. It still needs a shroud over it, so we don't understand. I don't want to understand everything about the alien. Then it just makes it less scary. But I think a little bit more information is possible. But then, yeah, there's these things sort of happening in tandem where we're finding out some really interesting things about this substance while also seeing, the alien life cycle sped up to as fast as it can be, which makes it less believable. But and someone asked earlier, like, why is this happening? Why are we seeing this sped up? In Resurrection, they don't. In Resurrection, what is I can't remember the character. Is it
Purvis?
Whatever his name was. What was it?
I think his name's Purvis.
Purvis. I was going to say Jarvis. Purvis. It takes however long it takes, but it feels like a really, really, really long time, and that time creates tension. And when you shorten that time, it's like, okay.
And they know what's going to happen to him because when he starts, when he's like, and they're like all looking at him like, do we kill him now or what happens? And then they're like, oh, I guess you get to live. Like it's played for comedy, but like it's an interesting choice. So yeah, I mean, I do think it is worth saying that no matter what we say about the black goo, the thing that gets everybody to the theater for Aliens movies is still the characters. It is still the characters. It is one of the places that Romulus really shines. Particularly, I love the relationship between Andy and Rain. Oh my God. And I cannot help but notice that ND is an abbreviation for neurodivergent. Right? So, like, I feel very strongly that was a super sympathetic portrayal. I also really like the idea that the thing that gets between a caregiver and her loved one is capitalism. Because as a person who works hard to raise a very disabled child, I feel like that all the time. For the movie to just constantly bring in that and twist the knife every 10 seconds, that was beautiful. That was expertly done. I think Andy's my favorite android work in the entire franchise, including my own.
Preach. It's amazing.
I love Andy so much, and that actor was phenomenal. Just the difference in super subtle face expressions. This guy's doing full body acting, full face acting the entire time. Everybody else is being given these fairly straightforward lines. I know how I would feel about every single situation, but Andy's bringing like extra to every single scene, and it's all in the way you can see him sort of turning over every problem in his mind. Is it okay that I'm gonna die? And he's really internalized that. In the end, when she's like, "You're not worthless," he's like, "Oh, updated. Oh wow." He's like a different person, and then he gets the neck slash. But hey, whatever. I'm sure he'll be fine. They won't kill him between movies like they did two other characters that I enjoyed a lot.
Well, that I thought they were great, and yeah, they were very much the heart of the story. But that brings up an interesting question: as this movie's doing really well, if it does eventually get a sequel, alien characters typically don't have the best luck going from one movie to the next. So it's like, well, would we continue with these characters, or would it be just another completely unrelated story?
I would love to continue with the characters. I hope that we'll get to see Andy again for sure. I would love to see Andy again. And Rain wasn't bad. I'm not trying to like crap on Rain. I loved Andy. So that sort of, but yeah, so that was just exceptional. There was a lot of that. I mean, and also going back for Andy, like, I mean, I'm a cat widow. I love my cat. But the xenomorph and an exploding ship, not to be like I'd get over it, but like I'd be like, there was nothing I could do. But when she goes back for Andy, I was like, that's like going back for my son. I would absolutely do that. Or my sister, or my dad, or my mom. Like, this person is absolutely family, has proven it the entire time. Also, favorite moment, the solution to the problem was in the puns. I I love that there's a pun, and then it's like, oh,
I couldn't put it down. Yeah.
Oh my God.
But I think too, we have to remember Andy was a representation of her father. And so she didn't want to lose
Right.
that, I think is really cool too.
It has everything. It has everything. I mean, and it is kind of in the same way that like, not only are you, I think you're directly correct in that her father gave directives and the dad jokes and all that other stuff. Like, he's kind of cast as a father and a brother at the same time, which is how anyone's siblings are, right? Like, they are very much the ingredients of your parents. And I mean, people who have lost parents, they cling to their siblings a lot of times because of those reminders, or they avoid their siblings because of those reminders. But yeah, that love was really real, and I love watching her face as she's like, do I go back? The question, fear is always interesting, because fear is so amplified when somebody is going into a situation where they know it's a problem, not just the reader knows it's a problem. And I really appreciated that. I thought that was exceptional.
I love that. That's a really great point. It's amplified when the character themselves know it's a problem, not just the people watching them. And of course, that brings to mind Ripley and Aliens, right? It's the same idea. It's that actualization of her, being a hero. She chooses to go back, and I think that's part of why that moment resonates so much. And to me, that keeps Rain from being just sort of, because we all kind of knew she was going to be the final girl character a little bit. We kind of assumed that was going to be the case. But she does get that real moment of like agency and choice towards the end of the movie that I think really sells her character to me and makes her like, I mean, nothing's going to touch Andy for me in this film in terms of characterizations, but Rain really does endear herself to me a lot. And she's somebody that I really enjoy watching throughout the movie.
I thought that a lot of the characterizations were actually really strong. I do find myself constantly wanting to ask for Navarro's pronouns. I'm like, I'm getting some strong themergy. And I thought that, like, I liked Bjorn a lot more on the second viewing. Like, on the first viewing, I didn't like him very much, but on the second viewing, I was like, you know what? I kind of am enjoying this guy. I kind of wanted him to learn better before he died. That would have been nice. But that's okay. He had a terrible life, and then it was over. Like, all these people, I mean, I think the real tragedy of Romulus is that none of them ever got to live. when you look at like Ripley and the crew of the Nostromo, everybody always likes to call them space truckers, but I couldn't disagree more. Only a few of them are. Ripley and Dallas are both college graduates if you look at the fact that they're flight officers, right? So, like, they're older, not old, but they are older, right? They're more mature about this sort of stuff. This is a bunch of kids who've been screwed the entire time, and then they got screwed one final time, and some of them literally. And that's really that's the tragedy of Romulus that almost doesn't really get talked about. They are more dead than other characters in my mind.
I want to turn it over to Adam for a moment because we've all, had a lot of time to share some of our, ever evolving opinions and viewpoints on this. But I haven't really gotten to speak with you personally about how you feel about Romulus yet. Like, what are some of your thoughts on this film?
I've seen it 4 times so far. I liked it. I don't know if I loved it. I read your review. I think you wrote that review, Patrick, right? And
I did, but we had talked first.
I share a lot of your thoughts on the movie. I can't decide if it's either 7.5 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 for me. Seeing it again for the 4th time last night, I really liked it. I think the characters are great. The world feels very Alien and Aliens, like the production design, the cinematography, the music, the tension. Everything is just so on point. I think with general audiences, this movie is going to do super well. I mean, it already is, right? And with critics, it's doing better than Alien's done in a long time as well. With fans, it seems like we've had a few polls on our site, and it's mostly 5 out of 5, 4 out of 5, like 65%. So like this is, I don't think we need to worry about what place Disney's going to put Alien and Predator in anymore. Like the franchises are in better places than they were in the late 2010s. For me personally, yeah, I like Romulus. Maybe I even like it a lot. I don't know if I love it like I love Prey. And maybe I'll get there. I didn't walk away pulling my hair out like Prometheus and Covenant, so I'll take that as a win, right? And so yeah, part of this is just like what I want to see in an Alien movie. I was kind of hoping it would be like Isolation, where it's completely divorced from the prequels, but I get they have to acknowledge that after the cliffhanger they left it on. So I thought they did handle that pretty well. There were a few, logic questions I had, like why didn't the company go to the planet, or like they're just going to leave their top secret space station floating in orbit next to their own colony, and this is not going to be detected. Like,
a little weird. That's a little weird. Not gonna lie, I also felt the same way. I was like, that's an object that can be seen from the ground. Did you guys, what's going on here?
And things like, okay, it takes 9 years to get to the Yavaga. Is this the only non-Weyland-Yutani system with a sun that they can go to? Like, why do they need to go to this place specifically? So there were a few like,
that's the closest system.
Is that what they said?
I think that's the closest system. I mean, I will tell you that like when you start looking at astronomical distances, like it's pretty reasonable to be like, oh, the closest thing is 9 years.
Well, that's a weird thing in the Alien universe, right? Because in the first movie, the Nostromo, they say 10 months is halfway from Earth to LV-426. Covenant was like 7 years. And I think we know from the Aliens novelization that a Conestoga ship can make it to LV-426 in like 3 weeks' time, which is implied to be about how long Newt survived. So Alien has always been very contradictory in some of these nerdy sci-fi details and stuff like that. So you just kind of have to go with it at the end of the day sometimes. So
it's like how Alien has it seems very hard sci-fi, but the gravity drives end at the edge of the ship.
Yeah,
like a gravity sphere.
It's not like Event Horizon where they just go to a different dimension, not the one they were aiming for. But I liked it. I also had the same kind of issues you guys did, where I feel like it took the callbacks a bit too far. Like some are fine, right? But when it feels pandery, fan servicey, it just feels like studio executives going like, "Oh, this is what the fans are going to love if they say this line," and then they're going to clap like seals, right? And I'm like, no.
Is it like, the "you bitch" line?
That was part of it. There's some more subtle ones, like even from Alien 3, like when the aliens are rushing Tyler, he says, "Come on, is that all you got? Is that all you got?" I'm like, "Oh, Alien 3, okay." Busy Little Creatures, Perfect Organism, you have my sympathy. Exactly. So there was just like a few too many. I don't think they needed Ian Holmes. I know they got permission, and that's like, I'm not against it ethically. It's just the effect didn't fully work for me. And I'm like, they casted Phoebe Waller-Bridge, right? And so if they would have had her, we wouldn't have known if we were going to trust this other android or not. Whereas with Ash, we instantly distrust him, and of course he's trying to screw them over, just like we all expected. So yeah, the movie had some problems for me, but there's so much it does well, that it is frustrating because it feels to me like it's right on the verge of greatness. It's like right there, like a few little things were different, it would be great for me. But even just really liking the movie is better than I felt about the theatrical Alien releases for a long time. Like, a lot of my Alien fandom is in the expanded universe, honestly. So to be as satisfied as I am with a new movie, I'm super stoked about that. So it is a weird mix of emotions for me, but I really did like it.
Well, that's the thing, you know, I like it too. I've been thinking a lot about my like overall opinion, and I'm like, it's fun, but it's not good. But there are things that are amazing in it too. It's this mix of emotions. It's kind of all over the place.
Can you
But
explain fun but not good to me?
like a roller
I mean,
coaster is fun, but it's not good, you know?
I think they're pretty good.
yeah,
like
I
It's
only
fun.
want to go on
It's
good roller coasters. Thank you very much, safety people.
it's fun, but you throw up at the end.
yeah. Yeah, or there's things that you can like, there's things that we watch that are like, and I'm not saying Romulus is on this level, but those guilty pleasures. Oh yeah, that was a fun ride. What's next? I'm not thinking about this too much in the end, but at the same time, to everyone's point, that everyone's saying across fandom and general audiences, Andy is king. Andy makes this film. Andy elevates this film. Without him, this film would not, like, I've called Romulus a very entry level Alien film. All the beats we've seen before in space, a ship or a space station. So all the beats, everything that we've seen before. But inside of it are some amazing things, like the elevation of the substance from being just goo to actually being something. That is incredible. It's some great world building. And then to your point, Alex, Andy embodies this character, or David Johnson embodies the character of Andy in a way that we've never seen androids performed before, but also reflect. You know, I have two very autistic nephews, of four nephews, and I see so much of them in him. So much of that trying to figure out where they fit in their own little world because they're children. And it's really amazing, and it's something that we can continue to discuss and dive into over and over, and that's just amazing. But on the periphery of Andy, everything else is very, in my opinion, take it or leave it. But it's fun.
So let me. You know, can I jump in here? Is that okay? I don't want to step on you, but I really do. I have so much to say here. So the first thing is that I think that when you look at what Alien is sort of canonically and whether or not it brings greatness to the canon, I don't think any film should ever focus on bringing greatness to the corporate style guide. I think that that is a terrible thing to do. And I think that the only reason why Plagiarus Praepotens exists inside of that movie is because my characters were interesting. I think it would have been just another forgettable, stupid book. And so, however, not everything has to be equal weight good, right? So if you're writing a book about, for example, a war crime, and then it's like, also, I got this Ninja Turtles ooze in it. I'm indicting myself here. It's easier to come after myself. People can accept that. You know, I need the movie to be saying something. One of the things I love about Fede's previous movie, Don't Breathe, is that it strongly implicates economic factors again and again and again. And this time, it implicated economic factors against racism and against ableism. And I think that that was something that the Alien franchise was sorely lacking. Whenever somebody says, like, what's wrong with the prequels? What's wrong with the prequels? You know, first of all, I enjoyed the prequels. The fact is that I think that it's important to stay focused on these things. And what I've seen in interviews from Fede was that he also wanted to unite the fandom by throwing out a whole bunch of mentions to them. So, there's the Alien Isolation Safe Station and all this other stuff. And that's real great. And hey, look, I enjoyed my mention too. So like it'd be wrong to be like, I enjoyed my candy. No one else gets candy. But like at the same time, that's not a high-minded attempt. That's just you going out onto the stage for stand-up and going, hello, Chicago, again and again and again and again. You can't make a movie out of Hello, Chicago. That's Star Wars Episode 9, right? That's there's so many movies, and especially I think when you look at sort of the Disneyfication of universes, which I'm not, again, it makes money and I want to work in that system, so like call me. But at the same time, I'm gonna say that shout outs get you nothing. They are not worth anything. I put a bunch of them into Charybdis as sort of like I want to see if I can repurpose this line and do it in a subtle way. And I got somebody in a review was like, there were too many of those. And I was like, you know what? There probably were. I don't think that it's helpful. And when you start writing a book for Alien, you start in a tremendous amount of narrative debt. And every Alien movie starts in a tremendous amount of narrative debt. Everything is against you from the beginning. And the reason why is none of you are going to be surprised when somebody gets face hugged. None of you are going to be surprised when somebody gets chest burst. None of you are going to be surprised when somebody gets dragged off and nested up. There's nothing surprising to you. The only time you get surprised about a space tardigrade, big deal, okay? Big deal. Who cares? It's a space tardigrade. I don't care at all about the new things in the life cycle. It's great. It's cool. There's an animal. Okay. Animals do all these things. So none of those are impressive. The only thing that matters is whether or not you can do something interesting with it. And the fact is that, like the space tardigrade thing, that's to explain where they got the sample from, which again is the most boring question that anybody ever asks. Expanding the canon is a waste of time. Fan shoutouts are a waste of time. You get nothing for doing that. Nobody's impressed when a chest burster happens. You still have to do it though, and that's the worst part. If you don't do it, people are going to be like, where were the chest bursters? I only saw a deacon, right? And so it's like, well, I made you a new thing. Well, I don't like the new thing. Okay, sorry. Here's the old thing. Well, that's boring. I've already seen it. Right? Characters are the only thing that matters. If I can just, to anybody who's listening, who loves the canon, who can't wait to collect the next alien fact, I want you to know that that is nothing but the mechanics of a setting. That's it. Put a lightsaber in it. Oh, is that sacrilege? It doesn't matter. If you put a lightsaber in it, it's still fine. We can just add that to the canon. There we go. Who cares? Right?
I think they already did that in one of the Marvel comics recently, actually.
There you go. There you go.
But yeah, I mean, I've heard this movie described as the Force Awakens version of Alien, which I don't like hearing that.
That's not fair. That is not fair. The Force Awakens was definitely Hello, Chicago.
So I think there's ways to do callbacks and have it be appropriate. Like even in Prey, when they do the line, if it bleeds, we can kill it. It's weird because that one I was like, okay, that kind of works there. Aaron kind of disagreed with me. But the get away from her, you bitch part here, I thought you guys were on the money that it kind of takes something away from Ripley with a line as iconic as that, insinuating she wasn't the first one to say those words in that exact circumstance. I'm like, even though it got applause from the theater and people chuckled. So I'm like, okay, like for people, this is working obviously, but yeah.
That was a huge groaner for me, but just because I was like, he wouldn't even say that. Also, why would he gender that creature? Like, he's an android.
Continuity.
I think they set it up with how much Bjorn was calling him bitch, so he's just like, okay, this is an insult.
Okay. So they put work into this callback. Sorry, my bad. They used screen time to set up the callback that does not, for me, do anything. Now, again, other people might feel differently, but I feel like that's taking it too far. I think that you can, you have my sympathies or whatever. That's fine. That's clearly an Ash model, whatever. It's the jerky jerk hyperdynes or whatever. And that's just how they talk. That's fine. I'm fine with that. I actually don't even, I will say I wasn't like, oh my God, it's Ash. I was like, why is it Ash? But again, that's because I don't want to make a universe. My favorite thing about writing an alien is that most of them die every time. So I can kill off a bunch of characters and nobody's like, you're a jerk. Because if I do that in my originals, my editors will be like, what? Stop doing that, you know? And I'm like, it's not a gunfight unless somebody gets shot, you know? But they usually die, and so you can come up with new people, and you can come up with new ideas, and you can do all these new things. And that's what I want to do. Yeah, I'm not really interested in like they have a saying in comics writing, comics about comics. And so that is when a comic is written or an arc that's written that does almost nothing for the fans except fixes some issue with the canon. And I think that filmmakers need to take care to avoid that. And I'm also going to say, I don't know that the need to unify the fandom is necessarily something that Fede came up with on his own. Okay? I have just said in this podcast that my personal views are different than views you will see represented later. Right? I think that if you get face hugged, you're doomed. Anybody who's paying attention to what I wrote recently and some trailers will know that that doesn't make a ton of sense. And so I think that, this is a team sport. And the other members of your team are accountants who would like past performances to be replicated. They're looking for predictable outcomes. So also one of the things I hate reading on these reviews is somebody saying, oh, I love the Jackson Star Colony stuff. It was so cool. This is my favorite part of the movie. That's the best part of the movie. I'm like, yeah, it's an $80 million movie. It's 1/6 of a Star War. So that's why Jackson Star is the first part of the movie and not the whole movie. Right? Like it's different, like they still bet against Alien. Okay? Like this is not close to a Star War. So
I think to your point of united fandom, and we experienced this in Covenant, and I remember talking about this with Aaron Percival, where you saw the poster for Covenant and there was tons of aliens on it, and they just like, okay, this is an alien movie now. We're throwing aliens in it. And they thought that's what fans wanted to see in Prometheus. Like, oh, they wanted to see aliens. There's this gap
they
between
give you the exact same crew from Prometheus in Covenant. They were all taking their helmets up.
Yeah, and there's this gap between what studio thinks fans want and what actual fans want, but that's also a slippery slope because fans want everything and nothing. You can't do that. You can't do it. You can't unite fandom. However, you have to really be listening to kind of what the more elevated voices are saying that perhaps might be speaking for fandom, and part of that is so the divide here possibly with Romulus is, well, fans want to hear these lines again. Fans want to see Rain do everything Ripley did in the end, when in fact, fans aren't looking for the same thing again. But if you go to fan films, they repeat all that shit over and over and over and over and over. That's not what you want to do. And if you look at how many people watch those, there are like 40 people watch that video.
Take us to church,
people...
Jamie. I love it.
Well, it's just the reality that they think fans want to see the same thing over. That means you're not listening. That means you're really not listening to what people are saying. If you're really listening to what people are saying, people want a unique experience. People want, which is why Into Charybdis and your first book are so fucking successful, because they were what we knew turned on its head in a beautiful way, and you told a story that no one has heard before. That's what people want. That's why those books are successful. And I hope they can hear this. I also think Noah Hawley knows this. So we'll see about that.
I hope so. And I do think that Fede knows this on some level. I think that just because there were a bunch of fan shout outs and because he really liked it does not necessarily, I mean, like I said, I put a bunch of fan shout outs. Okay, like I'm just as guilty. So like I understand. My founding principle, though, when I write a book, is not that I'm going to produce the missing movie or the lost episode. That, to me, like if I did that with Star Trek, that's dropping my Star Trek book in a pile of 950 others. That's just the books. You know, in the case of the Alien universe, it would have been the same thing. What you want is how you felt the first time you watched the movie. Right? And I can't replicate that by showing you the movie again. That's the conflict. That's the inherent conflict of it. I want what I saw the first time, or I want what I felt the first time, but I can't see it all again. That's the hard part. You know, that's one of the reasons why you don't see more IP work out.
I think too, it's, you know, it's a different generation now of people going to the movies, seeing the movies. We're in this post-COVID time of, you know, what's successful, and we don't know exactly what it must have been like for Fede to also have, you know, Ridley Scott and the studio looking over his shoulder. And
Lord knows David Fincher got screwed with all the time.
Right. And so there's a lot of those things that we don't know. We may never know, but it's, you know, I hope Fede does end up coming on and he shed some light there a little bit to just help us understand. Because Patrick, like you said on our previous episode, like, we're hyper fans of this franchise. We all are. It's something we have spent years dedicating a lot of our time to consuming, understanding, reading about, researching. And so for us, we are very much, Alex, chasing that first time we watched it, what we felt like the first time. And the studio is, you know, look, you talk about the accelerant and things like that. Like, there's also this whole other half of viewership that is trying to be pleased with how they consume media nowadays and what's successful there, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, like, you can't wait 45 minutes to show a known creature designed to Gen Z, right? Like, that's...
Yeah, sadly.
So, you know, and there are narrative ways around that, but, you know, this is the one that was picked, and this, again, you have no idea what the studio did, right? I mean, Don't Breathe was a very successful movie, but it's not so successful that this guy can just come in and walk all over it. I appreciate this podcast's sympathy toward the people who work on the franchise, because it's not just up to us. We own it with a consortium of shareholders. It's so weird to make an alien story with Wayland Yutani. You know what I mean? Like, but that's kind of what it feels like sometimes. But the people at the publisher have always been really nice to me. So, like, I don't know.
Well, we will continue to, sympathize with the plight of people working on this incredibly complicated franchise, and we're going to have many more of them on, which is really exciting. A lot of people who worked on Romulus in particular are coming on in the coming months, including some big names that we are not going to say yet, but very exciting. And you know, in the interest of wrapping in time, thank you so much, Alex, for being back in. Adam Zeller, thank you so much for being here. Make sure, if you don't already, subscribe to Adam's amazing podcast, long-running podcast with AVP Galaxy, which also features other friends of ours who have been on and who you know if you are in fandom, you know, at all. We really appreciate what AVP, you know, brings to the scene as well. And Alex White, of course, you know, just thank you for all of your work. Make sure you give them a follow on social media and elsewhere to be able to keep abreast of what's going on in Alex White world. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
And don't forget to wishlist or pre-order Alien Rogue Incursion if you would like my latest Alien writing.
Yes, coming holiday 2024, which is
let's go
approaching.
Didn't they nail down the date? I think they nailed down the date. But anyway, who cares? Wishlist it now on Steam.
Wishlist it anyway.
I'm actually so stoked about that game, and just talking with you and the rest of the team at Servios, Alex, at San Diego Comic-Con only increased my hype for it. Like, one of my favorite Alien experiences of all time was this VR experience that was in Southern California called Alien Descent, if any of you guys remember that. And it was, you walked through this environment and you had a VR headset on, but they had all these environmental effects, and you were actually on catwalks and elevators and stuff, or at least they felt like elevators. So it was super immersive. Unfortunately, it only lasted like 2 years, but ever since then, I've always wanted to get a true Alien VR experience again. And seeing all the new footage and hearing how much thought was put into the details of this game has me super stoked for it.
I gotta tell you, I was so excited when I came on board, and I played the first demo, and I was like, that was really good, and it was great to feel the pulse rifle mechanics, because that was one of the first things that was like pretty well nailed down, I felt. But I was like, I can't wait to see these things a little bit more lethal, and that was of course that was the feedback across the board, across the demo, just get it more lethal. They're very lethal now. It's awesome. If you've got a couple of them, it's a real problem immediately. It is fantastic. You are not going to just walk to the end of that game. You expect to die. It's going to be fun. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be heart pounding, and I hope deeply emotional.
Well, thank you everyone for being on. It's been a great episode. Alex, thank you. Adam, thank you so much. I love talking with you guys. It was great talking with you and meeting up at San Diego Comic-Con and spending time and eating some great food, and just, it was a great time. So thanks everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Alex.
For more on Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, please visit perfectorganism.com. Perfect Organism is available for listen or download through Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and Spotify. If you'd like to support the show, please visit perfectorganism.com/support. Thank you.